Hey guys, here we are. I've got Cameron again for a fortnightly update. Really well timed this one because it's great. We're going to be able to hear Cameron's thoughts on the budget that was released this time last week, I think. And he's also got some other thoughts just in reflection of some other things that have been going on in the marketplace, particularly in the construction, as well as some of you may have seen a piece that he wrote today, which I think is relevant for all of us and something to be thinking about. So I'll get out of the way and leave it to you, Cameron.
Cheers. Look, I thought I'd just take you through just a few things we've seen in the past week or so. The Reserve Bank was out last week just prior to the budget. We had the budget on Thursday as well, and then obviously we saw Fletcher Building's results in the recent time as well. Just in regard to the Reserve Bank stepped up to the plate last week. They didn't fiddle or play with the official cash rate. The official cash rate's already down at 0.25%, which is hellishly low, and effectively they're sort of zero bound. And they're still talking a big game about the potential for interest rates to go negative. Is that a scenario I'd like to see? The answer is no. I'm not convinced, given the experience of Europe or Japan, that negative interest rates actually work. But what we saw from the Reserve Bank was an expanded QE, quantitative easing program. And now what that program allows the Reserve Bank is to get up there and buy more government bonds. So the government at the moment is out there furiously borrowing. They're putting money out there in the market. And in an ordinary economic environment, if you're trying to sell something, well, normally the price of it goes down. So that's what tends to take place is interest rates move up. What we're seeing at the moment is because the Reserve Bank is acting in the market, they're effectively got the backstop for the government because they're buying an awful lot of government bonds. So their lending facility or their asset program facility, they took it up from 33 billion to 60 billion. Now that is a huge amount of cash that's going to get floating around New Zealand in the next 12 to 24 months. But what it's also doing is it's allowing money to get redeployed, and it's also helping to keep interest rates hellishly low. And what have we seen in the past couple of days? I just see one bank is now taking, I think the 1 year fixed lending rate is now down at 2.79%. I think the 2 year rate is now down sub 3%. So yes, monetary policy is stepping up to the plate. Lower borrowing costs, good news for borrowers. The Reserve Bank is actually out there being pretty serious in regard to what they're saying about to the banks, that they'd like to see those interest rates even lower. They're keeping an eye on bank margins. They want to see more of the benefit of lower interest rates flowing into borrowing costs and helping the New Zealand economy out over the next 12 to 24 months. The other thing we're seeing out there at the moment is obviously what happened to the budget. The budget was just another example of what we call kitchen sink style economics. Literally throw the kitchen sink at this thing. The government didn't just go big, they went awfully big. So the COVID response package, 62 odd billion. A lot of that has already been allocated. They've got about 19 to 20 billion that is left to go over the remainder of 2020 and 2021. Look, we saw some really good stuff in the budget in regard to extension of the wage subsidy scheme, 1.6 billion going to trades and apprenticeships. How that money is allocated, looked after, I think still going to be the $1 million question. My personal view was that I would have liked to have seen a direct subsidy going straight to employers to just take on an apprenticeship and leave it to the employer to sort it out. About $1 billion to environmental-based jobs. What they're going to look like is somewhat interesting. What was interesting in the budget was, and probably a bit of a missing link. I congratulate the government on going big. Look, they needed to go big. They've got a balance sheet to deploy and get money into the economy. The missing ingredient or link in the budget was really what I call a bit of an economic plan. Now, coming up with an economic plan in regard to the rebuild of the New Zealand economy is hellishly hard at the moment because, of course, everything's moving so damn quickly. we're moving down through the alert levels, but we're seeing, an awful lot of action around the globe, and it's pretty hard to get a bit of a steer on where the economy actually sits. Certainly things are less bad than what they were 6 weeks ago, but that's a long way away from saying things are good. As we're moving down through the alert levels, we're seeing a little bit more activity as more firms go back to work. But I think the Minister of Finance missed a golden opportunity to stand up and give a little bit more of a vision in regard to where New Zealand is going. Interesting to see a letter appeared in the Herald today from the head of the Business Advisory Panel. They're quite critical of New Zealand relative to Australia in regard to how we've handled the COVID-19 response. So you can start to see there's a little bit of niggle starting to come through in regard to, yes, we're dishing out money across the economy. We've moved big, we've moved hard, but people are looking for the semblance of what that economic plan, that reboot is going to look like on the other side. And this is where, look, we need a pretty clear strategy in regard to things, strategic assets, things such as water. How do we unlock the potential of that going forward? Now, there's a whole lot of issues in regard to that, but we need to have a bit of a framework to start to think about what that is going to look like on the other side. Unfortunately, in regard to the budget, we didn't really get that. The other thing to bear in mind in regard to the budget is that while we are going pretty big in regard to the supporting the economy in the near term by leveraging off the government balance sheet, well, someone's going to end up having to pay that money back down the track. Government debt goes to just under 55% of GDP, about 200 billion. Now, from about 2023, 2024, the baseline assumptions are that the government is going to exercise a bit of spending restraint. So less spending in the budgets, and they've actually dialed back their assumption for capital investment. Now, this is things such as maintenance, not maintenance, this is things about construction activity in schools, roads, education. Making sure that your services are fit for purpose. They've dialed that back. The assumptions have gone back from 6.6 billion to 3 billion. Now, that is a real tough spending constraint in regard to capital spending, but it gives you a bit of an idea about what is needed for an elongated period to get debt down on the other side. And I go back and have a look at the criticisms that got laid out at the previous government after the global financial crisis and after Christchurch, because there wasn't an awful lot of money to go around in regard to operational spend and capital spend. And what is detailed within the government's fiscal strategy report? A little bit of a repeat. Now, we're going to have to get into a pretty serious debate, I think, in 2021 beyond the election. And we start to think about, well, how are we going to go through this process of fiscal repair? Are we prepared to go really tight in regard to spending? Is that the sort of environment New Zealand wants to be in? And some people will, and some people won't. Do we want to make some pretty bold, big decisions in regard to the likes of age of entitlement for New Zealand superannuation? And that's a pretty politically hard one to stomach. Or the other one is, are we going to end up with increases in taxes? And what could that look like? And who could end up paying on the other side? But having debt up around 50% of GDP for a sustained period is just not sustainable in my eyes. A little stat, by 2030, 2034, it looks like New Zealand, based on the debt projections, will be spending more on finance costs than what we are on education. We will be spending more on finance costs than the combined spending on defence, core government services, and law and order. Now, that just gives you an idea about what that interest bill is going to look like 10 years down the track if we keep on writing out the cheques and borrowing. Our final thing, I just saw some Fletcher Building results that have come out in the past 24 hours. Obviously, a little bit eye-watering in regard to what they're expecting over the coming 12 months. A pretty big fall in residential building consents, which I agree with. They've got commercial building activity pulling back as well. My personal view is that the real impact on the commercial sector is probably going to be more towards the back half of 2021 and 2022. Yes, there's going to be opportunities in regard to infrastructure style spend, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get those projects up and running. If you look at Fletcher Building's sales line, their headline sales line is going to go from something up at around sort of 9 billion. It looks like they're going to be in the new environment a $7 to $7.5 billion company. So what have we seen? If the sales line is lower, you've got to reset the cost line. And of course, unfortunately, that means there's a fair few job losses that have been announced. But it just highlights one of the themes that I've talked about earlier, is that the downturn, the correction we are going through is not just your normal cyclical V-style recovery, i.e. you go down hard and you come out helliciously strong on the other side. It's more of a U. It's a little bit more structural. The sales line is going to be weaker for a little bit longer. If the sales line is going to be weaker for a wee bit longer, you think about resetting the cost line, bracing for a new normal. And what we saw within those Fletcher Building results in the last 24 hours was just a classic illustration of that at work.
Thanks for that, Cameron. So what are you hearing from across the banks in terms of lending? Granted, interest rates are low, but how free are they being with that money?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If you ever look at, people tend to focus mostly on the price of credit. Well, the big game in town at the moment is availability. And what we're seeing behind the scenes is that officially the banks are open. They've got money to go, but there is a massive tightening up that's actually going on. And some of that is appropriate because we're in a different economic environment. Obviously, whether you got a job or not is a different assessment to be made today compared to what that was probably like 12 odd months ago. We're seeing banks are tightening up in regard to what sort of income you can claim to support your mortgage. So they're more closely perusing things such as where you got a border, whether that's acceptable or not. Your Airbnb income, they're less likely to treat that as a reliable income source. And of course, you probably need a little bit more evidence in regard to whether you've been employed with who and for how long. So what are we seeing out there at the moment? A lot more boxes to tick before you're going to get that approval from the bank. And
then you spoke last week around that relationship between low interest rates, but also term deposit rates, and that they can only go so low before they can't make the money in the bank work.
Yes, so if I have a look at the moment, if you look at the term deposit curve across New Zealand, it's basically flatlined around 2.5%.
Yeah.
And here we've got the banks that are offering, one bank's offering 2.79% for a 1 year fixed special. So you sort of try to do the maths on work on that in regard to how it actually works. But the Reserve Bank has actually offered to lend banks cheaper money. So banks have actually got the potential to access this lending facility that the banks got set up and pay less through the deposit window. Now, whether the banks start to access that money and gives them a little bit more manoeuvrability in regard to the physical borrowing rates remains to be seen. But certainly the Reserve Bank is pretty keen on making sure those borrowing rates continue to come down. But of course, there's borrowing rates for some and there's borrowing rates for others. What we are seeing is pretty aggressive competition in the retail mortgage market space. What I'm hearing more and more is in other parts of the economy, the corporate arena, stuff to do with commercial property, the construction-related activity, agriculture is another one. A lot more boxes to tick, and credit margins are certainly not coming down. They're more inclined to go up.
Yeah. What would you be doing in terms of fixing or floating, and how long at the moment? Or you waiting?
It depends on individual circumstances. I was always found from my risk appetites, the 1 and the 2 year rate has been pretty attractive. It's provided a little bit of certainty, but I didn't really need a lot of certainty. So I just went out for the outright value proposition. At the moment, we're in an environment where interest rates are incredibly low. Why? Because the economy's in serious trouble, and we're more likely to be in a deflationary environment as opposed to an inflationary one. So what do? You make sure that your interest rates is all at the front part of the curve. But if I sit there and think about where New Zealand could be 5 years out, I'm starting to think there could be a bit of inflation on the horizon. As globalization unwinds and we produce more stuff locally and it's not as cost effective, if we start to see a lot more government involvement across the economy, which I think we're going to start to see, that's going to be inflationary as well. we've got a bit of a recipe here. We could see a bit of a modest bout of inflation 5 years out. Now, that's tomorrow's story, not today's. But eventually in a couple of years, I'm going to start to think about that in regard to where I want to be in regard to borrowing. So after being heavily concentrated in 1 and 2 years for basically the past decade, at some stage in the next 5, I'm going to start to think more about the 3, the 4, and the 5 year part of the curve.
Yeah. And it's about picking that timing, which is always the difficulty. If you're fixing now for 1 or 2 years, it's picking as soon as that curve starts to tip the other way, then you see the switch in the rates between the short term and the long term rates, and if you leave it too late, you miss the opportunity.
Yeah, but I guess the other way to think about this as well, and it sort of drives, some of my behaviour as well, is that, look, if having long-term or being fixed with long-term rates give you certainty, which is great. But if all of a sudden the economy tanks, you sort of want to benefit from those lower rates. Right? So you don't get that benefit. Now, you say the economy sort of turns up. If the economy's turning up and you're making more money, well, you're probably not going to worry too much about your interest bill. Right? So one strategy, and it doesn't fit everybody, is to think about, well, let's just make sure that when I'm not making money, I'm benefiting from those lower interest rates. And when I'm making money, I can actually afford to pay those higher interest rates, as opposed to get too cute in regard to trying to sort of shuffle about within the cycle. If you're making more, you're probably not going to be too worried about whether your interest bill goes up a bit. But if you're making less, you're going to be pretty upset if you're not getting the benefit of those lower rates.
I don't know where it's at now, but I know a few years ago I had friends in the States who were able to, when their interest rates were rock bottom, probably still are, but they were able to lock in like 2% for 30 years with no penalties on early repayments and things. How do they get themselves, the American banking, to a position where they're offering those kind of deals? And could you ever see a smaller scale of that happening in New Zealand?
Well, there didn't seem to be too much of an appetite in New Zealand, at least when I was at the banking sector, for people to go out and have a 5 or a 10-year loan. Most people just tended to like, around sort of 2 to 3 years. The favoured part of the curve in the past 5 to 7 has actually been sort of 1 to 2 year. People have been shortening it up. Could we see a structural shift at some stage over time? The answer is yes, but it require a pretty big behavioural shift across society in regard to where they were prepared to borrow. If you look at there's big jurisdictional differences, right? If you look at Australia, Australians tend to be more inclined towards the floating rate, less towards fixed. And New Zealand tends to be less inclined towards floating and a little bit more towards fixed. But typically the fixed rates we chase are 1 and 2 years.
What's been in the budget that you think would be beneficial or detrimental for the building industry?
Well,
nothing.
The glass half full interpretation is that, they're pretty keen on making the sector, I think, a lot more resilient across the economic cycle. So investing in the trades, investing in the capability. Because what did we see during the GFC? When work collapsed, no one was reinvesting in capability, the trades, maintaining your workforce, and then all of a sudden we've got the kickback up, and there's no capability onto it on the other side. So we're starting to take a little bit more of a long-term perspective. But once again, the devil will be in the detail in regard to how that money is ponied up, who gets it, and whether it's actually going to be effective. Look, we know there's another 20 billion here that's yet to be allocated. But where is that money going to be going? Interestingly, the 2 weeks prior to the budget, the government made $19.4 billion worth of decisions. On budget day, they couldn't give us a list in regard to what was actually in those. Now, we got the bigger picture stuff, the $3.2 billion extension of the wage subsidy, the 1.6 for trades, apprenticeships, the $1 billion for environmental sort of jobs. But I would have thought if you're throwing money around and you've thrown 19.4 billion out the door, shouldn't be too hard to come up with a list in regard to where that money's going. Apparently, we're supposed to be getting that list hopefully tomorrow.
Do you think that the second wage subsidy scheme is going to have that much of an uptake? Because in my thoughts and some of the feedback I've heard, if you're down 50% on revenue, you're not in good shape regardless. It might encourage you to keep the doors open and pay the staff a bit longer, just that minimum amount. But there's not going to be, you may not have much left to go to at the end of that.
No, and this is where, look, even if you're down, say 20 to 30, right? That is, I don't think too many businesses have got a 20 to 30% margin.
No.
Right, not even close to that. So what does that mean? You've got to fundamentally reset the cost line.
Yeah.
So I've got a suspicion that there's a bow wave of stuff that's starting to come. Fletcher's was a bit of a taste. Here in New Zealand, I saw a headline the other day. Your warehouse is now going through every single store. It looks like Birkenhead could get chopped as well. Anything that's uneconomic that does not stack up is going to get taken out of the equation. Yeah. Now, to be fair, a lot of the sort of stuff probably should have got done pre-COVID. All COVID is doing is just a bit of an accelerant on a whole lot of decisions that actually should have been made. Ironically, though, for those businesses, they've got pretty good balance sheets, manoeuvrability, and particularly, these New Zealand businesses that are not completely big, but have got a bit of scale, but are a lot more long-term focused.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be able to duck and dive quite nicely around some of the opportunities that are going to be out there.
Yeah. Otherwise it's just essentially another form of benefit, but it's just channeling it through the employer instead of wins, right?
Yeah, and you can understand it's a fine balancing act on behalf of the taxpayer. Because yes, do you want to be getting money out there into the economy supporting businesses? Of course we do, because otherwise we're going to be footing the bill anyway in regard to people on the job seeker benefit. But you want to make sure that the firms that are applying for this thing, they've got to be financially stretched. So they've tightened the parameters now in regard to what the assumption is over financial stress. You did have to show that you were 30% down.
Yeah.
And now you've got to show that you're 50% down, and that's at alert level 2. If you're 50% down at alert level 2, that's a pretty big thumping, a pretty big knock.
Yeah.
You'd sort of expect that the only businesses that will be down, 50%, presumably be an awful lot of tourism-related businesses and hospitality will be two that I'd imagine be front and centre in regard to claiming that 3.2 billion.
Yeah.
But the typical business, like you have a look at Fletcher Building. Fletcher Building has come out, and they've obviously, they're taking a pretty big hit to their sales line, but they've been quite open. They're not eligible.
Yeah.
And even if they were eligible, I'm not convinced they would have taken it anyway.
Yeah. Your HR lines up with what you're trying to deliver. And if your top lines drop down, then you're not really requiring to deliver as much. I don't know that that's necessarily where the money was needed, unless they can repurpose those people into sales, marketing roles that are going to draw in more income, as opposed to those people that were delivering outputs, for the demand that was already there.
Yeah, but the big issue for a whole lot of businesses was just outright liquidity.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think about an organisation such as Fletcher Building, $9 billion turnover business. To be fair, some of that's overseas as well as being local. But if you shut down their business for the month of April, which is what basically happened, you are talking about megabucks in regard to what the cost of that stuff is. Fair enough, a lot of that is wage costs, but you think about commercial rents on properties, sites, these sort of things. What we're seeing in the commercial property market has been quite interesting, where there's still a little bit of argy-bargy between tenant versus landlord in some situations. Yeah. But hearing a lot of stories about pragmatism. I'll help you. You stick around. Maybe you extend the lease a little bit. We'll catch up with it sort of down the track. Those are the sort of things that if you do the right thing, by effectively your customer in the near term, they'll be hellishly appreciative of that down the track. Yeah.
Yeah, although it's interesting, the landlord was the one person who wasn't offered any help and was kind of just expected to come to the party. And some can do that, but a lot of them can't.
Yeah, this is where you need the banks to be pretty pragmatic as well.
Yeah.
If you're breaching covenants temporarily, well, it's a temporary breach. You don't sting them too much with the additional interest rate charges that come through these sort of things. We need effectively a little bit of sharing of the pain all around. The one that I'm still hot on at the moment is local authorities and rates.
Yeah.
I'm about to write an article on one. There's one council down south, Timaru District Council.
Yeah.
Was going to be putting up rates 7%, then they got it down to 4%, and it now looks like it's going to be 2%. Timaru District Council last year had an operating surplus of 15 million on revenue of 80 million. and they still think they should be putting up rates in this environment. I'm like, what planet are they on?
Yeah.
Now, there's some local authorities that, to be fair, are up against their debt limits.
Yeah.
They don't have the same sort of flexibility. But come on, if you're printing, you got money in the bank and they've got heaps of cash. They've got about 15 million in the bank, cash at hand. And here they want to put up rates to make an extra $1 million. I'm like, just absorb it.
There's a disconnect at that level between the local body and the ratepayers. It just doesn't seem to be. Perhaps it's to do with the lack of engagement with local body politics when it comes to election time, and the turnouts of voting, and maybe they're aware that people are engaging at national government in terms of what's going on there, but nobody's really kicking up a fuss and they can get away with what they like.
Yeah, well, some of them starting to kick up a bit of fuss in Auckland. I had a real good pop at the Wellington City Council. I went through their balance sheet and just what their numbers are. They've got capacity to go zero. Do the right thing. I look at it pretty simply. What's going on across New Zealand? The big need to help the small. If you've got balance sheet capability, whether you're central government, whether you're central bank, whether you're a bank, whether you're a big corporate and you can pull forward some of your investment plans for the next 2 years to help the economy out, you do it. If you're a commercial landlord, you can help your tenant out, you do it. If you're a residential landlord, you can help your tenant out, you do it. But it's all about the big supporting the small. And that's how sort of we get through this thing. Everybody doing a little bit. And just the attitudes of some of the councils are just absolutely beyond me in regard to how they've been behaving.
Yeah. Where does Auckland sit in terms of balance sheet and debt levels and that?
They're pretty high. So strictly speaking, they don't have too much capability. But what's happened is that the local, the lending facility that councils are part of has relaxed, what their debt covenants effectively look like. So they used to have a covenant, I think it was around debt could be about 2.5 times income. They've taken that up to 3 times income. And so that gives them a little bit of wriggle room out there, to provide a bit of support. And councils are getting up there and they're providing support for people that can't pay their rates, these sort of things. But to me, it's a little bit more of a leadership issue. Like you just stand out and you say, look, now is the wrong time to be putting up rates. The number is zero. That might mean in 2 years' time, when things are better, sorry, we're going to hit it to you. But it's about
leadership. Doing the same as what the business sector is doing in looking at costs. We all know there's a lot of wasted spending in that space. And the businesses aren't getting away with it, so why should they?
And like if you sit there and if you think about Auckland Council is a classic example at the moment, and they've had a long-term plan based on need so many houses, so many people coming into Auckland. Well, you can probably throw that long-term plan out the door for the next 5 to 7 years because the migration numbers are not going to be anywhere near what they were previously expecting. So you get back at ground zero in regard to what are our infrastructure needs going forward? Where should we be redeploying capital? Where are we going to be getting the best bang for our buck? Interesting. Just water in Auckland.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. That, from my understanding, that I mean they're already drawing from the Waikato, but they're only allowed to take so much because of resource consent, not because of capacity.
Yeah, that'll be right.
So, stroke of a pen could fix the problem tomorrow, but we won't see it. Yeah. Hey, appreciate it, mate.
No, cool. Take care.
Yeah.
All the best.
Good stuff. Speak to you in a couple of weeks.